So the day that it happens, let's go there. So, I mean, do you remember before you found out? You remember that vividly?
It was one of those. I remember it because it was a beautiful Friday, and it was September 23, 1994. It was, Texas is so hot throughout August and September, but finally the heat had broken, and it felt like a kind of a crisp beginning of fall sort of day, and it was so beautiful. And it was Friday, and I went to Spanish. I only had one class that day, and it was my Spanish class. I went to it, and I had aced the test that I'd done the class before. So, man, I mean, what more could I ask for? I was trying to get off of academic probation. I had just started a new semester in college, and I was like, okay, I'm off to a good start. It's Friday. It's a beautiful day, and I was only gone from my dorm room for maybe an hour and a half. And when I arrived back to it, it was an old school answering machine sitting there on the desk, and it had like seven messages on it, and that was highly unusual. I mean, it just didn't. I was like, man, what is going on? I listen, and there's a message from my mom saying, Miles, we have a problem. I need you to call your Uncle Rayford. That's my dad's brother. And then another message from my Uncle Rayford saying, we've got a problem, call me. And then like two messages from the school saying, your uncle has contacted us trying to locate you. We understand there's a problem. Please contact. So I'm like, oh my God. All right. So I finally get a hold of my uncle, and he says, your dad was on his way to work this morning. And I mean, this is all obviously in milliseconds, but I'm thinking, he was on his way to work, and he's been in a car accident, something like that. But when he said, and he was kidnapped, he was stopped at a roadblock and he was kidnapped. I mean, it was the most. I was not expect. I was not expecting it at all. There was nothing that prepared me for that, and it literally. I mean, I just kind of. I don't remember anything after that really in the conversation. Just that. I never faced anything even close to that. My family never had. And I don't really remember the rest of the conversation. I remember getting off the phone, and then it was this sort of panic that just hit me in just such a major way. And there was nobody with me, and I just couldn't even stay in the room. I started pacing, and I went out into the hallway, and I paced up and down in the dorm hallway, and then I mean I was like, what am I doing? I went back into the dorm, and then by this time the school is calling me, and so I'm having to take calls, and I'm explaining to them. I had the dean of student affairs call me, and you can almost hear his book on the other end of the line, like, uh, parents, somebody has cancer, or, there's been somebody in a car accident, and so they ask me what's wrong because they don't know.
Right.
And I'm like, yeah, I spoke to my uncle, and my dad was kidnapped this morning, and you get the
He's like flipping
DM
through.
just like,
There's no kidnapping and yeah.
there was like nothing. He was like came like there was nothing for what to do if your student's parents are kidnapped. So that was kind of, and then they sort of they I guess called the RA and had people descended upon me, and my roommate walked into the room like an hour later, and there's like three or four different people, RAs and all that, and he was like, "Oh my God, we've been busted for another alcohol violation."
Right.
Everybody looks so somber, and
Yeah. Yeah. How does that information even? I mean, obviously, if someone is kidnapping, or I shouldn't say obviously, typically, um, it's for ransom. So how is that information? Hey, your father, your husband, your brother has been kidnapped. How does that even get back to your family?
well, I mean, it was all speculative at first. It's just that there were witnesses that were on that same road that morning that had been stopped at this roadblock. And the title of the film is Miracle Fishing. It's about a procedure that the guerrillas use called pesca milagrosa, miracle fishing. They would cast a net at a roadblock in hopes of, you know, getting a fancy car or getting some jewelry or some cash. And in my dad's case, he was an American, a gringo, and that obviously means cash right away. And they took him. They weren't planning it, but these witnesses that whose cars were stolen, or purses were robbed or whatever that morning, talked about this gringo who was put in the back of a pickup truck, and they headed east off towards the mountains. His car was left behind, and there was FARC paraphernalia, in the front seat. And FARC being the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, the largest guerrilla army in the Western Hemisphere at the time. And there had been so many kidnappings already at that point. It had been going on for years that it became pretty obvious, like, what had happened. But in those immediate hours and days, those first few days, there was a feeling, or a hope, I should say, with my family, and people at my dad's company and everything, that, my dad's work wasn't, nobody deserves to be kidnapped. Nobody deserves to be kidnapped. But my dad's work wasn't exploitive or anything else like that. He wasn't working for an oil company, or he was doing humanitarian work, helping the same people that the guerrillas claim to represent, the people that are starving. And so everybody thought, okay, maybe if they through the news or whatever, they let it be known that, he's a humanitarian, you have the wrong guy, that maybe the guerrillas, out of the goodness of their hearts, will let him go. But so I dropped out of college that day and flew down the next day. And being with my mom and my brother, like, friends or, whatever from Colombia would come to us or talk to us or call my mom or whatever on the phone. And all of a sudden, everybody started talking about these kidnapping issues that they had in their families. Like, when my father was kidnapped, when our son was kidnapped, when my uncle was kidnapped. And they all said the same thing to us, like, don't ever believe if you see that somebody was released that, it was for because the guerrillas are good or anything. There was always a ransom paid. This is how it's resolved. So it only lasted, the thought of him maybe being released because they realize who he is, only lasted for a few hours or a few days. Very shortly afterwards, it became very clear, because Colombia was the kidnapping capital of the world at the time. And I don't think I knew, my mom definitely had premonitions about it, and was reading the news and was very aware, but I guess we just assumed that it wouldn't, like, affect us. And obviously, boom, it had. And so this reality of having to pay a ransom was what we were having to deal with.